All right, so today we're going to start shading the barn. If you have access to an ebony pencil at home or a 6B, that's what you're going to want to use. If not, this can all be accomplished with a number 2 pencil and a good eraser. We will be doing some additional drawing here at the beginning. So for example, we need to add the damage that's been done to this side of the barn. So to begin with, we're going to count up 2 boards, and then the third board is going to be broken here at the end. So I'm just going to add a jagged line, and it doesn't have to be exactly like mine, but you want to come just a little bit away from the corner of the wall. Then you're going to go up one more board. This one's broken at more of an angle. And then the last broken board on the bottom is broken over here by the doorway. And again, just use a jagged line to indicate broken boards. To make it easier and less confusing, erase the broken parts away, leaving just the gap or the hole in the barn. Now, depending on how large you drew your boards, this could be a very large space or it could be a very narrow space. Again, this is where everybody's drawing is going to vary slightly and be somewhat unique. So the next damaged area, we're going to allow 2 more good boards that are unbroken. And then the next damaged area, almost this entire board is broken out. So it's broken far, far down here at the corner. And then opposite that, the 2 boards above it are broken down here near the end. And again, just use jagged lines to indicate broken boards. That's going to be the simplest solution. And then erase where those boards are broken. Now, just like on this short wall over here, we'll be able to see the interior structure of the barn, these 2 studs. On this side, since more wall is exposed, we're going to have 4 of those. So the first one is going to be right over here by the door frame, and we're going to draw it so that it passes behind these 2 good boards. Then I would suggest moving over just a little bit, perhaps the width of a finger, and drawing the next stud in. It should continue from one broken section into the next broken section. The easiest way to check this is to use your pencil. As long as it lines up from one section to the next section, then you're good. If it's a little off, just make an adjustment. And again, depending on this distance, you may only have 3 of these, you might only have 2, or perhaps you could have more than 4, you could have 5. All right, but it's the interior structure of the wall. All right, the next thing we're going to do using a number 2 pencil is we're going to add some detail to these repair boards that were added to the barn. We're going to be indicating wood grain. So wood grain is the lines that run along a board whenever it's been cut from a log. So when we draw these, they're just going to look like parallel wavy lines. And I don't really know a better way to explain that. But you want to keep them fairly close together and all running more or less the same direction. These are only going to be on the boards which were used in the repair of the barn. Now, the best thing to use for this, honestly, is a .05 mechanical pencil. It'll put down a really thin line that will be easy to control. And you want to make these rather dark, as we're going to be shading over top of them later. So if you draw them light, for the most part, that will just kind of disappear, and it won't be nearly as interesting as the detail that we need it to be. Now, we're going to use this technique again on the 7 boards that have been used to board up the horse stalls. Now, these boards, because they're quite a bit larger, okay, the grain would be even more visible. So again, perhaps on this one, you could use just a regular wooden number 2 pencil, and that would be fine. If this is done correctly, it should not look like bacon. If yours looks like strips of bacon, you probably have the lines too far apart. And again, take your time. This is in no way a race or a rush. These are just details that are going to add interest to the finished drawing. All right, so for those of you that are drawing in class, as well as those of you that are drawing at home, we're going to go ahead and move on in the interest of time. If you didn't finish all of this detail work, you will have opportunity to do that later. We're going to start by shading with the ebony pencil the eave of the barn. Remember, the eave of a house or of any structure is the part that projects away from the wall and during a rainstorm like today would divert water off the roof. So this area, and we're going to start up here at the top, is going to be dark gray. Because the light in our picture is coming in from the right, and this part is on the opposite side of the barn, it's going to be quite dark. There is no need to make it jet black, however, as there would still be, given that this is a daylight picture, a fair amount of sun even underneath this edge of the building. So again, you're going to want to shade in the eave both of the barn and the side of the tool shed roof dark gray. Again, remember to shade in loops, in smooth overlapping strokes. Shouldn't look like your barn's covered in straw. So the next thing we're going to turn our attention to is the tool shed, and we need to add some additional detail lines, just like we did on the boards. So as we see here, the tool shed is made of vertical planks running up and down. If we were to just shade over those, for the most part, they would disappear. So what we're going to do first is, starting at the top and using the ebony pencil, I'm going to push down really hard and then lighten up. So what this is going to do is it's going to darken the top of the line, so that when we shade over it, the detail of our boards simply just doesn't vanish into our shading. So go ahead and indicate those lines a little bit darker using the ebony pencil. All right, the tool shed itself, again, if the light is coming from up here and this being on the far side of the barn, it's not going to get a terrible amount of light because the barn is obscuring it. So when I shade, I'm going to start off with a fairly dark gray right up against the edge of the barn, and I'm very quickly going to fade to a light gray. Since the barn is made out of wood and all the wood would have weathered fairly evenly over time, we don't want to make it too
Teachers
dark.
and students, please pardon this announcement. Swim today has been canceled. Swim today has been canceled. Teachers, if you have any swimmers that need to contact their parents, please allow them to do so. Otherwise, you will report to the library.
So as I was saying, it's dark up against the main structure and gets lighter as it moves to the left. You'll notice, because my paper is quite a bit bigger than yours, I had to break this down into 3 sections as I shaded it, and you may have to do the same on your paper. And you will get slight darkening where those sections overlap, but again, that's not considered a fault. Also, we're not doing any finger blending, so you're not going to want to rub the paper with your finger or anything else at this point. We'll go back and we'll smooth the values out later using a different technique. Now, the next direction that we're going to darken is we're going to come right up underneath the eave right here. And again, this is going to be fairly dark because it's in shadow, but it's very quickly going to fade out and match the value that you just laid down. All right, we're going to turn our attention to the damaged part on the left side of the barn's opening. Since we're seeing to the interior of the barn, these areas will be quite dark, if not black. When you shade them, you should try to make this a smooth, even area of dark value, because what we're actually looking at is the interior of the barn, and there are no lights on in the barn. There's no illumination of any kind, So these would be very dark. The one caution I would say is don't shade over the internal structure, the studs that are holding the wall up. Those need to stay fairly light and apparent so that we get the idea that we're looking inside the barn's internal structure. For now, we're not going to do anything with the boards that are repair work. We'll come back and address those a little bit later. You can work your way down this wall as all these values would be relatively the same, doing each section in turn. Just try to be consistent in your application of the value. All right, we're now going to turn our attention to the boards which are spanning the remainder of the front of our barn. These boards are going to be shaded in such a way that the top of each board will be dark gray, the middle of each board will be middle gray, and the bottom will remain a thin strip of white. Again, this will largely determine on how large you drew your boards as how it will be done. Now, what you want to avoid is it to look like the barn caught on fire and almost burned down. So if you have to make an error, make the error that the boards are shaded too lightly in this process rather than too dark. Now, again, keep in mind that my drawing being quite a bit larger than those of you working in class or at home, you may have to modify the technique just slightly, but you're going to go board by board. The larger boards or the longer boards will have to be broken down into sections so that you don't get curved lines in your shading or run over the original lines where you drew them. So my advice is to go very slowly and to take your time, focusing on each board in turn as you shade it. For now, we're not going to do anything with the hayloft opening or the main opening of the barn. Just work on those boards around those two areas. Again, notice I'm still shading in loops. Each board is dark, then medium gray, and then a thin strip of white. It's fine that there is slight variation in the shading. Again, because the barn's made out of wood and is weathered over time, there would be variations in the overall color, even if the barn were painted. Now, as we shade this, we're going to save this damaged area over here for last. So my advice is to start at the peak of the barn and to work down. And then as you get to this first unbroken board above this damage, just stop at that point and we'll pick back up there as a group. Again, notice how these longer boards, I'm breaking them up into sections, shade a section, and then move over. All right, before returning to this last damaged section of wall, we're going to turn our attention to both the hay barn opening and the main opening of the barn. Both of these, we can see the internal frame that's supporting the opening. And that's actually what we're going to shade first. We're going to start in the corner where the 45-degree angle is. I'm going to begin by shading black to dark gray to middle gray to light gray down the edge. I'm going to do this on both the hay loft opening as well as the main opening of the barn itself. So again, black to dark gray to middle gray to light gray, and in this case, to the ground. All right, the crossbar of the hayloft is going to be shaded from, again, the 45-degree angle to the right, dark to light. The main doorway is going to have a slightly different approach, as we're going to shade the cross beam dark at the upper line and getting lighter as it approaches the bottom line. It needs to be considerably darker than the other boards making up the front of the barn. In this way, you'll make it stand out and be more apparent. You can also darken the corner of the opening to make it stand out from the rest of the structure. All right, the hayloft opening is shaded from dark to light and from dark to light. In this process, you want to maintain the integrity of the opening that you drew. So try not to go outside of your lines and over your boards, which you have previously shaded. Again, this fade out process should be gradual and smooth. And again, we're going to do this from the top down as well. Start black, dark gray, medium gray, and finish light gray. All right, the main barn opening reveals some inner structure that we need to draw in. Much like we put the details on the repair boards and the stall boards, we're going to add some detail in the interior of this door to make it interesting. What we're seeing are the boards that are making the inside wall. You'll notice I'm keeping these boards, in this case, parallel to the ground rather than parallel to the structure, because they're actually going back into the barn. As I draw them, you'll also notice I'm not taking them all the way to the other side. It's unnecessary because that side of the opening will be so dark that even if you did draw them there, they would be buried underneath shading. We also don't need to carry the lines all the way to the top for the same reason. Because the top of the door, getting no light, is going to be very dark. All right, so returning to the main opening, again, I'm going to start on the right with a black value. As I shade across, dark gray. When I get to the middle, it should be middle gray. And then I'm going to finish with a light gray. Again, I'm having to do this in sections due to the size of my drawing. You may need to do it in sections as well. Work on having the transition from dark to light being as smooth as possible, and have your application of value be as smooth as possible. Notice how the lines that we drew to be the interior structure of the barn are now merely just ghost-like lines, adding interest and detail. Also, we're not going to worry about any lines that are protruding onto the ground, as we'll be cleaning that up later on in this drawing. All right, the next direction we're going to shade is from the top of the doorway towards the ground. And again, I'm going to start off jet black with quite a bit of pressure, and very quickly I'm going to fade and match the surrounding value. There should be no evidence of a definite stop point in your shading. It should just smoothly fade out into what's already there. All right. The last direction we're going to shade in regards to the opening of the door is we're going to shade diagonally from the upper right corner towards the lower left corner. And again, there should be no obvious point that you stop. It should simply transition